Now that we've set up our front end to send GraphQL requests, it's time to actually write our GraphQL query. And Craft provides us with a really handy sandbox tool for testing our GraphQL queries before we actually put them into our final code. And so that's in the sidebar here, and we just go to GraphQL and we click on GraphQL, and that opens up this nice sandbox area here. By default, this is set up to query the full schema for the site, but we want to just use our recipes and filter categories so we get the most accurate results. And in order to access that schema, we need to pass in our token. And so we do that through the headers tab down here. So I'll just go into my tokens area again, and we'll copy it one more time. And then we'll just format this in JSON. There we go. And so now we've passed in our token. Now, if this looks familiar to you, it's probably because it's exactly the same header that we passed in when we set up our Apollo client. So we passed in our authorization header here. So it's the same kind of setup. Now we're ready to start writing our query. So GraphQL queries are formatted pretty similar to JavaScript functions. And so we're going to start by writing query, and we're going to call it get recipe entries. And then we're going to pass it some attributes that we're going to use to filter our responses. And so right now we just want to filter our entries by section. So we're going to go section. Now GraphQL is a typed language, and if you don't have any experience working with typed languages, basically all it means is that you have to explicitly say what kind or type of data is allowed to be assigned to variables. So in this case, our section filtering is exactly the same as writing a craft entries query in our Twig template. So in a Twig template, we would write craft.entries.section, and then we would pass in an array of strings like recipes, and maybe we'd also do blog or something like that. So here in GraphQL, it's the exact same thing. We're going to be passing in an array of strings to our section attribute. And so we need to tell it that that's what we're going to give it. And so we're going to define an array with brackets, and then inside of that is a string. So that says that we are going to give you an array of strings. If we tried to pass in a number or an array of numbers, it would reject our query because the typing isn't correct. So now that we have that set up, this top level query is querying our entire schema. But remember, our schema can access entries, and it can also access assets, and it can also access categories. So it can access lots of different things. So we need to tell it specifically what part of our schema we're looking for. And what we want is entries. And this is a keyword that is provided for us by Craft. And this is why working within this GraphQL sandbox is really helpful, because as you type, it will give you suggestions for keywords that might get you where you need to go. And so entries is a Craft keyword. And if we start to type entries, you can see it's going to give us suggestions. We can pull up just a singular entry. We can pull up an entry count, so the number of entries in a particular section. We can pull up a single asset or a set of assets or categories. But for right now, we just want an entry listing. So we're going to use entries. And again, similar to a JavaScript function, we're just going to pass in filters. And again, we're just going to filter by section. So section, and we're going to pass in that section attribute that we got from our top level query. So this section gets passed into that section. And now we're ready to ask for our fields. And so to start, we'll ask for an ID. And again, it's giving us suggestions. So that'll give you an idea of what you have available to you, a title, and then also a URI. All right, so let's go ahead and click play. And as you can see, we get a list of entries with an ID, a title, and a URI. Just a quick note on terminology here. If you are going to be looking at the GraphQL or the Apollo docs, GraphQL refers to this part of the query as a field, and that's different from what we think of as fields in Craft CMS. So just be aware when you see the word field in reference to a GraphQL query, that's actually talking about this top level function and not necessarily the actual field data that you're getting from your CMS. Now, you're probably wondering, hang on, we never actually told GraphQL what section we wanted. We didn't actually say recipes anywhere. And so right now we're actually getting back every entry on our site. So if I had, say, a blog section, then I would also be getting all of the IDs, titles, and URIs for every blog entry. And so we want to make sure that we're specifically saying that we just want our recipes entry. And so to do that, we're going to pass in variables, and that's going to be in this tab down here. And this is also JSON formatted. And so we're just going to say section and an array of strings, because that's what we said the type of that attribute is. And so recipes. And so now that we have that, we can click play again. And nothing's really changing because I only have one channel in this site, but we're now getting back only entries in the recipes section. So we're getting ID, title, and URI because those fields are universal to every entry on a Craft site, but we still need an image for our listings. We've got our title and our URI, but we want to put an image in our little listing card here. And so the image is unique to the specific entry type. So we have an entry type called recipe, singular. And so in order to access that, we have to drill down a little bit deeper. And so to do that, we're going to use a GraphQL keyword, which is 3 dots, and then on. And now we're going to start typing the handle of our entry type, which is recipe. And you can see GraphQL is giving us a suggestion for what we can use. And this is what we want. We want recipe underscore entry. And so recipe, this is the name of our entry type. And then entry is, this is a Craft provided keyword. So this is basically telling us that we want data from the entry inside the recipe type. And so then we'll just create some brackets. And now we can access all of our fields inside that entry type. So we want our image. My field is named image. And then inside that, we want the URL of that image. And so now if we click play again, we get our image with our URL. So now we have this GraphQL query all set up and it looks like it's working well. We're ready to actually plug it into our front end site. So let's go into our Next.js front end. So we're going to create a new field in our data folder, and we're going to call it recipe entries query. And we're going to import the GQL class from Apollo Client. And then we're going to initialize that class. And we're going to call it get recipe entries. And this screaming snake case is the recommended syntax for an Apollo Client query. So we're just going to follow that recommended syntax. And so now we'll go GQL, and we're going to use backticks, not quotes, but we're going to use backticks in order to pass in our GQL query. So now we'll go back and we'll grab our query, we'll copy and paste, and just fix the indenting here. All right, and now we're just going to export this. The next thing to do is to open up the component for our landing page. And so for me, that's index.js. And I have a component here called home. And so that is the component that when I load my home page, that is what is being pulled in. And so in order to actually start using our query, we're going to import the use query hook from Apollo. And then we're going to import the get recipe entries query that we just created. All right, we're going to create a set of variables that we're going to pass to our query. I'm just going to make an object. And so right now we just want to filter by section. So we'll just go section, recipes, again, an array of strings. Now we're going to call our query. We're going to create a couple of variables that are going to get returned, either an error or data. And then we'll call use query, get recipe entries, that's the query we want to use, and then we'll pass in our variables. Now, when this query resolves, we're going to get one of two things. We're going to get an error, that's if something went wrong, or we're going to get our data back. So let's write a little bit of logic to handle if we get an error. And so the first thing we'll do is we'll just go if error, we'll print it to the console, and we'll just return a little message. All right. Now, something else that can trip you up when you are using this use query is that sometimes the component will mount before the query has a chance to finish retrieving the data, and that can cause a rendering error. And so we just need a way of handling that. So we're just going to write a bit of logic that says if there is no data, then return null. And that will prevent an error from being thrown before the data has come back. So let's confirm that we're getting the data back that we want. Let's just do a console log of our data and open up our site. All right, and you can see we've got this object that's been returned. And this object is exactly the same as what we got back in our GraphQL sandbox. So we're getting back the exact same data that we got when we did our test. So that's good. So now let's plug that data into the component and actually populate our fields. So I'm just using a placeholder array called items. I'm going to replace that with data entries. And I'll change this to entry to make it a little bit easier. So we're going to pass in a key, which is going to be our entry ID, and then the URI to the entry, and then the source to the image. And remember that assets fields are arrays, and they return multiple results. So we just want to get the first image in that assets field array, and then URL. And for the alt, we'll use the title, though of course it's more accessible if you do a custom alt tag. But for now, we'll just do the title and pass in the title. Okay. So now let's check and see if that data populated on the front end. Yes, it did. See, so we've got all of our field data returned, all of our entries displaying on our listing page. Just a note, if you're using Next.js, you may need to update your configuration file to allow for handling of remote images, because we are pulling in these images from an off-site source. So just be aware that that may cause an error if you're not configured correctly within Next.js. One other thing I want to mention is you may have noticed that we are using the entry URI and not the entry URL for our href. And the reason for that is that the entry URL is a fully qualified URL, which means that if we were to put that in here, we would get a link that takes us back to our Craft backend site, which we don't want. We want to stay on our front end site. And so by having a URI, which is just a local URI, that will keep us locally on our front end site. So things are looking good. We are currently loading every entry on the home page. We're not paginating anything right now. So in a future tutorial, we are going to do some pagination to keep this listing page from getting unwieldy and breaking it up into smaller bits. But for now, our listing page is looking good.